Good evening, good morning, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of the Sherlockian interview. We have Margaret Walsh here, and it's very early in Australia. Margaret, good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
And we are going to be doing the book launch of The Adventure of the Bloody Duck and Other Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So we're going to start with a reading from the book, Margaret. So hopefully you have a copy of the book there.
I do.
And I see that you're wearing a very fetching sweatshirt.
Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah, you need to stand up a little bit maybe, and we can see the whole thing. Fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the way to advertise your book as you're walking around the streets of Melbourne. Advertising your new book. So which story are we going to be reading tonight?
I'm going to read Deceptive Appearances. It's not a traditional pastiche in that when I had the idea for the story, it didn't work in the traditional format with Watson as the narrator. It was first published in 2017. It was actually the first story that MX published of mine, Steve. It was in David Ruffles' anthology, Tales from the Stranger's Room, Volume 3.
Fantastic. Looking forward to the story.
Okay, Deceptive Appearances. It was hard to believe that the man walking slowly towards me was the greatest mind in Britain, if not the world. The aforesaid mind was housed in a body so corpulent it was reminiscent of a pregnant hippopotamus. He walked up to the desk I was standing at and murmured, "Is the stranger's room free tonight, William?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes." "Good. Please have a table for 3 set. My brother and his companion will be joining me for supper." "What's available, do you know?" "Roast beef with all the trimmings, sir, with a fine fish soup to start, bread and butter pudding for afters, and I was told to tell you that the kitchen now has that excellent French blue cheese that you like to go with the port." Mycroft Holmes fairly beamed at me. "Excellent. A fine supper for us all." He headed for the stranger's room and I headed for the kitchens to let them know what was required. I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is William Smith and I am a doorman stroke flunky at the Diogenes Club. Don't bother looking it up. You won't have heard of it. It's very exclusive and very eccentric. You probably won't have heard of Mycroft Holmes either, and he would like it kept that way. You will have heard of his brother though, the great Sherlock Holmes, and his friend and biographer, Dr. John Watson. Damn them all to hell. The conversation flowed around the small table as I poured the port to end the meal. "I assure you, Mycroft, my source is reliable." "I'm sure it is, Sherlock, but really, who would want to kill me? Apart from almost everyone who knows you." "Holmes," Dr. Watson barked, "you're confusing your brother with yourself." Sherlock Holmes scowled at his friend, whose eyes twinkled with amusement. Mycroft Holmes chuckled richly. "A good shot, my dear doctor, a very good shot indeed." As I poured the port into the glass laid out for Mycroft, the doctor gestured with his fork, knocking the glass to the ground, spilling the fortified wine. "Oh dear." "It is fine, doctor. No harm is done, except to the carpet. We've had blood on this carpet, Sherlock. A little wine isn't going to worry the cleaning staff, any more than it worries you." The doctor passed his glass to Mycroft. "Here, do have mine. I haven't touched it." Mycroft took the glass with a nod of thanks, sipping the port thoughtfully. "I understand in theory that certain foreign powers might want me out of the way, but at this point in time, I do not see for whom it would be advantageous to have me removed from the playing field. My source suggests that the Tsar of all the Russias is looking to spread his wings. You are a known peacemaker, brother dear. With you out of the way, there will be no one to keep Britain and Germany from each other's throats. And whilst we were fighting," Dr. Watson added, "the Tsar would take the opportunity to snip a little land away from the Kaiser." "Interesting theory." Mycroft raised his glass and studied the fluid within. "Excellent vintage, this. William." "Yes, sir." "Tell the cellarman to order as many cases of this as he can. It's quite a robust little drop, reminiscent of a good artillery port." "Yes, sir." I turned away just as Dr. Watson managed to upset the finger bowl next to Mycroft. Water cascaded onto the floor. How did a man that clumsy get to be a doctor? "Really, Watson, I simply can't take you anywhere." Sherlock Holmes openly smirked. "Never mind, I'll just use a napkin instead of the water to clean my hands." "Allow me, sir." I leaned over Mycroft Holmes to lay a clean napkin on his lap. I surreptitiously flexed my right wrist to release the thin-bladed knife concealed there and froze. Something cold and metallic was pressed under my right ear. Do not even think about it. The voice was ice cold. The next moment, I was swung away from Mycroft, my arms pinioned behind me and handcuffs slapped around my wrists by Sherlock Holmes. I turned my head and looked to the source of that cold voice. Dr. Watson stood there, a revolver in his hand that was pointed straight at my head. Gone was the jovial dinner companion and the amiable buffoon. This man was more than capable of pulling the trigger, and it showed in every line of his body and in the cold light in his eyes. I was shoved into an abandoned chair. Sherlock Holmes looked sharply at me. It's not the Tsar who wants Mycroft dead, though. It's the Kaiser. That twaddle was for your benefit. Mycroft Holmes smiled benignly at me. I am curious as to why the Kaiser thought he could get away with killing me. He hasn't anyone in his service nearly intelligent enough to outwit my brother on one of his rare off days, let alone myself. He took a meditative sip of the port and glanced at his brother. Sherlock took up the thread again. We knew within hours of the German government's approach to you what was happening, William. Or should I say Wilhelm? Your mother is German, is she not? I looked away and did not reply. Dr. Watson shook his head. Surely you realise that all members of the Diogenes Club staff are watched. That was news to me. I looked quickly at Mycroft. He nodded. With a membership including a number of politicians, wealthy businessmen, and more than a few peers, naturally security is a high priority. Sherlock Holmes spoke again. We kept an eye on the roster, but once we knew you would be working tonight, it was child's play to organise this little charade. He smiled briefly at Dr. Watson. My good friend is usually nowhere near as clumsy as he was tonight. Holmes turned his attention back to me. I know you were merely to deliver the 2 poisons. Your co-conspirator at the German embassy is at this moment explaining himself to the king prior to being shipped back to Germany in ignominy. No doubt to his death, as the Kaiser cannot abide any failure except his own. A pity. Mycroft will miss playing him at chess, and a lass in the kitchen will miss his gallant attentions. As to your part in the matter, the sticky stamp on one of the port glasses told you which glass had poison painted in the interior, and the finger bowl with the X scratched into its base told you the same poison had been spread there. The blade at your wrist was simply a contingency plan in case something went wrong. He sipped his own port. You're right, Mycroft, this really is an excellent port. I shall see that a case is delivered to Baker Street tomorrow. Sherlock Holmes looked back at me. It was fiendish in its simplicity. The robustness of the port would disguise any taste, and if Mycroft didn't drink the port, he would wash his fingers prior to eating the cheese, and that pungent blue cheese that he so loves would, once again, serve to disguise the taste. The door to the stranger's room opened. 3 burly men entered and, at Mycroft's nod, hauled me from my seat and out of the room. I sit here now in a cell in the Tower of London, of all places. I haven't been tried. Mycroft advised the king against it. My treason is proven by my own actions, and he doesn't want to precipitate a war between Britain and Germany. That will come. As surely as the sun will rise tomorrow, war will come. I die today, I'll be hanged by the neck, though at least my body will be given to my mother for burial. Dr. Watson assured me of this. He demanded it of Mycroft Holmes, and Mycroft consented. I thought it was hard to believe that the greatest mind in Britain lurked in the bulk that is Mycroft Holmes. But I learned something else that night, that Dr. John H. Watson has the most deceptive appearance of all, an iron resolve and a great heart in the body of an unassuming man. End.
Fantastic. I love the fact that it's narrated by the criminal in the story. It's a very, very unusual take on a Sherlock Holmes story. So this is for fans listening that haven't come across your work before. This is your foray into short stories. So your first 3 books were novels. How did you choose the themes for the storylines in the book?
In Bloody Duck?
Yeah.
Each one was different. Bloody Duck, the titular title, that one actually came from a small crime that came across, real true crime that happened in New York in the 19th century. And I looked at it and I thought, that's something that would appeal to Holmes. So I just took the idea and turned it into a Holmes story. Deceptive Appearances, of course, came because the anthology was called Tales from the Stranger's Room. So I wanted something that revolved around or set in the Diogenes Club. One of the stories was an idea from a friend of mine. He said, I've got this really good idea for a short story, and he told me it, and I just said, yeah, it's a good idea, David. I will write it one day. And he died 2 months later before I had a chance to write the story. So when I was doing this anthology and I wanted at least one, and it ended up two brand new stories, I used his idea. Others have been where they've been required for David Markham's anthologies.
And do you have a favourite among them? Is there a favourite story within the book?
Oh, I'm very fond of The Adventure of the Bloody Duck itself, because I always like stories where the truth is stranger than fiction, and the fact that what happens with the duck actually did happen, endears the idea to me. But I think my favourite is The Vanishing Emeralds, The Mystery of the Vanishing Emeralds. That's the one that I wrote for David.
Fantastic. And we talked about you being there in Melbourne. What's it like being a Sherlockian writer in Australia? Most of our writers, as MX fans will know, are in the US, and we have quite a lot in the UK. But we do have half a dozen in Australia. What's that like?
I think it's probably a little harder to get the books actually physically into bricks and mortar stores. I mean, I was actually told by a local independent bookshop that Sherlock Holmes books don't sell. And I just sort of went, what? I mean, they don't even carry Bonnie with Birds. So my reaction to that was, what? Yet the big chains, I mean, as you've said yourself, there's millions of books in print, so they can't keep everything. But the big chains, at least, like Dymocks and Angus and Robertson, at least carry Sherlockian books on their online stores, even if they don't have them in the bricks and mortar. But the local ones were sort of very hard to get any sort of interest, because it's not Australian. The writer might be Australian, but the theme's not Australian. And I think too many of the independent bookshops here think it has to be an Australian theme for them to push the writer, which I don't think is correct. I do find there is more support, ironically, for a female writer in that area, because we have Sisters of Crime, which I'm a member of. And basically they arrange things for female writers, and they get female writers involved. They did a debate, I think it was last weekend, and they had several writers took part in that. So in some ways, I think it is a bit harder to be a Sherlockian writer in Australia, because it just doesn't seem, there isn't the level, I think, of demand for Holmesian books here that there are in the USA and in the UK.
Well, the good thing is that with modern publishing, your books are all over the world.
Yes.
Your first three novels, all of them feature multiple murders. What got you interested in serial crime?
It's a convergence of factors. First off, you can actually blame Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, because I had Study in Scarlet, and the first thing about that hooked me was when Stamford is telling Watson about Holmes beating a corpse, and to see if bruises would develop. And I hadn't come across that before. I thought, that's an interesting idea. And even at young, it dragged me into an interest in forensics. But then a couple of years later, Ted Bundy came along, and that was the first time any sort of killer had really taken my attention. And that was only because, even though I was very young, his victims had all had long brunette straight brunette hair like I did. And it was the first time that it had ever occurred to me that someone would kill someone just because they fitted this little image that they had of who, the perfect victim. And that gave me an interest in true crime. And I found most serial killers, I mean, they're not as clever as they are in the books because they get caught. If you were that clever, you're not going to get caught. But I found the way their minds worked very interesting. And it just meant I read more and more and more and more. And to quote Terry Pratchett, basically, every writer starts off as a reader. Eventually, you take in so many words, they start to spill out. And that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah, your first book is called The Molly Boy Murders, and it comes. It's set just after Jack the Ripper terrorizes London, and Holmes is on the path of another serial killer. Tell us a little bit about that book.
That one was interesting. It took me quite a bit to write that one. That was a convergence of reading two books, one after the other, and it just sort of triggered a scene in my mind. The first book that I read was a book about Fanny and Stella, basically two young, we would say transgender, basically male to female transgender in London, and who were treated abominably by the police and the courts. It was just utterly disgusting the way they were treated. And I read that, went from that to a book called How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodwin, I think it is, or Goodman. And in that, she talks about tight lacing with corsets to get the really, really small waist. And when I got to the bit about tight lacing, I found myself thinking back to the book I'd previously read about Fanny and Stella, and how that they would have had to have tight lace to get anything that vaguely resembled a female figure. And I found myself looking for other books, and I found illustrations of what tight lacing did to the body. And I just thought, I wonder what Holmes would make of it. And then just the ideas started to roll. How would he know? How would he see it? And then so I thought, the first scene that I actually wrote was the mortuary scene with Holmes and Watson and Lestrade, with the very first body that they are brought in on.
And there's been a lot of TV and film adaptations of Holmes. Are there any in particular that have attracted you, or any in particular that have frustrated you?
My first love when it comes to screen Holmes will always be Robert Stevens in The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. I absolutely adore that film. And the other one I'm quite fond of is Murder by Decree, with Christopher Plummer in the role. I did like BBC Sherlock for the first two seasons. I thought the modern adaptations that they did were good, but then you got to season 3, and when you take Mary Morstan from being a governess to an international assassin, it's so off-piste. They're not even skiing on the same field as everybody else. It just went, to me, that just went too far away from the source material to be comfortably be Holmes. I mean, Benedict Cumberbatch is a wonderful actor, but I did have issue with the way that, not the way he was acted, because basically the actor goes with the script. It was the way the character was written to make him just so rude and obnoxious. Because if you go to the books, you read the canon, Holmes does know the social niceties. He obeys the social niceties unless they're getting in his way. He's not rude to women. He's usually only rude to people who deserve it. But they just made him, he just felt wrong. The character just felt wrong. I could overlook it in the first 2 seasons simply because of how well the adaptations worked. What I felt they did adapt went really well. And I like the idea of making Irene Adler a dominatrix, because the adventuress stroke opera singer of the 19th century was just that little bit edgy for the time, whereas dominatrix in the 21st century is that little bit edgy. Sort of, you know, you couldn't have made her an opera singer or something in the 21st century because it's too respectable, which it wasn't in the 19th. So, you know, I thought that was a nice balance, but then it just went way off.
I think a lot of the critics talk about a lot of the critics talk about the Bondification of Sherlock Holmes, that it was almost as if they were leaning towards a James Bond action and adventure style in the later series of BBC Sherlock, rather than sticking to the mystery and deduction.
That's actually a good call. That is a good call. Basically, yeah, it was very. I mean, I have no problems with Action Holmes because the character himself is a very active man. I mean, he's been a boxer. Basically, he does single stick fighting. Basically, he does Japanese martial arts. Basically, I mean, this isn't a man that just is sedentary. You've got to have a certain level of fitness for all three. So that's basically, I know there are some people who don't like Robert Downey Jr.'s Holmes because they say, oh, he's too much of an action man. But to that side of the canon, Robert Downey Jr.'s Holmes is very accurate. But I mean, with Robert Downey Jr.'s Holmes, I do quite like the first movie, but I mentally treat it as steampunk.
Yeah,
I view that as steampunk.
Yeah, you know what you're getting with Robert Downey Jr.'s movies, don't you?
Yes.
You're walking in, and you know you can't imagine anybody standing up halfway through the movie in the movie theatre saying this is not what I signed up for and walking out of the cinema. That you know what you're getting. Steampunk, it's action, it's comedy. You know that's what you're getting with Robert Downey Jr. Some of your novels have been translated into Italian. What was that experience like?
That was actually it's an overused phrase, but it was mind blowing. When you messaged me and said, "Oh, sort of Molly Boy Murders is going to go into Italian," I thought, wow, just that somebody is going to get to read the book in a language that I can't read. When I got my copy, so looking at it, sort of my name's on the cover. I can pick out the names of the characters, but I can't read another thing. And it's just, look at it, it's just unreal. And yeah, I was delighted when it went into Italian. You know, it's just, I mean, I don't know how good the translation was because I don't read Italian, but I have heard from some people who have bought it, and they've said how much they've really enjoyed the edition. So obviously the story stays intact.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the titles change a little bit as well with the novels as well. So it's difficult because for us, I guess the Molly Boy Murders, that was a British and even London colloquialism, wasn't it? So to have to kind of translate that,
which he very neatly didn't. Basically, it's Sherlock Holmes and the Crimes of the Night is how the title translates back out into English.
Yeah, they often do that. They'll try not to step onto it. Final question of the evening, and for you the morning. What's next for you? Are you going back to novels, or is there going to be another short story anthology?
I'm going back to novels. I have just completed the first draft of my 4th novel, called Sherlock Holmes and the Curse of Neb-Hek-Ra. I've still got at least 2 more drafts to go through before it even looks at being submitted to you, Steve. But I also have a number of ideas for other novels and short stories. I've finished the first draft. I have put it to one side just to basically give my brain a break, because if you keep going on the same thing over and over and over, that's when you make mistakes or you miss mistakes. So right at this moment, I'm writing a short story for David Markham's next anthology, however impossible. So I've got till the end of June to get that one done. And then I'll go back to the second draft, to the draft of Nebheka Ra, which is, guess what? Serial killer.
Fantastic, and that sounds like an unusual name. I'm showing my ignorance here. What's the premise and what's the theme?
The premise is it's an Egyptian theme. The premise is corpses turning up in London, killed in unusual ways. And when Holmes and Watson and Lestrade, basically got Lestrade back, find out that there is an Egyptian connection, the connection turns out to be a curse that was applied to the tomb of an Egyptian priest, of what would happen to those that disturbed his rest. And lo and behold, people are dying in the ways that he put in his curse.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to that draft. Don't hold back too long before you send the draft through. It's been an absolute delight listening to that reading. I really loved the fact that it was from the viewpoint of the perpetrator there. That was fantastic, and wonderful interview, and look forward to that new novel as soon as you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure.